The AUKUS deal to deliver Australia's first nuclear submarine fleet has passed a key milestone. The US Senate Foreign Relations Committee over the weekend signed off on the transfer of the nuclear-powered subs to Australia's Navy. It marks another advancement of the Australian-American alliance. Joining me now is Sam Roggeveen, Director of the Lowy Institute's International Security Program, who's written about our relationship with the United States as China's influence in the region becomes more prominent. Sam, thanks so much for your time. Good to have you on the program. There's been, first of all, criticism from former Prime Minister Paul Keating of NATO, including NATO opening an office in Tokyo, saying NATO has no business in Asia. And Keating was praised by China's Global Times for that view. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese attended last week's NATO summit. What's your view? Do you agree with Paul Keating on NATO?
I wouldn't quite agree with Keating in as much as I don't think that NATO's presence in Asia is anything to worry about, but that's mainly because I don't think it'll amount to very much. NATO has its hands pretty full with Russia at the moment, and its core security concerns have always been European, and I don't see NATO becoming a truly global alliance with global interests. Primarily because its founding purpose doesn't allow for that, but also secondly, it simply doesn't have the capabilities. So even if NATO wanted to play a significant strategic role in the Asia-Pacific, it simply doesn't have the capabilities, even among its larger members, France and the UK, to significantly shift the balance of power in Asia.
OK, but you have concerns about the alliance between Australia and the US and the AUKUS agreement, nuclear subs. You think perhaps it paints a bit more of a target on our back? Is that right?
Yeah, look, that's what I've written about in the latest issue of Australian Foreign Affairs. I think it's more an essay that's designed to basically clarify what's actually happening here, as much as it is to express concern. And I think we do need to be clear that the terms of the alliance have shifted over the last year in particular, with two major announcements. The first being the news that the facilities at RAAF Tyndall, an airbase just south of Darwin, are going to be expanded to allow for American bombers to operate from there. And then there's Submarine Rotational Force West, which means that US and UK submarines are going to be operating from out of a new submarine base, or an expanded submarine base to be established at HMAS Stirling in Perth. And the significant thing there is that it indicates an operationalisation of the alliance. So as others have said, they've compared it to kind of like NATO, so that American forces are now going to be performing combat missions from Australian soil, which they really haven't done since the Second World War. That means American bombers, if it were to come to a war with China, American bombers will be flying combat missions out of RAAF Tyndall and would be striking targets in China. Similarly, American and British nuclear-powered submarines would be operating from HMAS Stirling. And so that increases the target on Australia's back. It means that almost certainly China would be interested in neutralising facilities like that.
But if there was a war with Taiwan, if China invaded Taiwan and the United States got involved, wouldn't we get involved as well because of our history here? And having these assets in Australia, isn't that a deterrent as well?
Yeah, look, it's certainly possible to make that argument. And first of all, there is doubt over whether Australia would get involved, and certainly there's even more argument about the extent to which we would get involved. So, we could offer a token commitment, or we could do something, much more significant that would make a much bigger contribution to the US-led effort. There's still an open argument there among policymakers as to whether Australia really would be involved. Will it contribute to deterrence? Well, to some degree, except that the overall quantum of American forces in this region are not changing very much. The United States is not committing more bombers, for instance, or as far as we know at this moment, it's not proposing to commit more nuclear-powered submarines to the region. It's simply moving the assets it has to Tyndall and to Western Australia. So, reordering its forces, not reinforcing them. So to that extent, actually, I think unless the United States is preparing a major reinforcement of its presence in the Asia-Pacific region, then deterrence is being slightly reduced somewhat because, in particular, the bombers, if they're based in Darwin rather than based in Guam, as they are now, then that makes them a slightly less potent military asset simply because they're further away.
Understood. What effect could a potential second Trump presidency have on NATO and Australia's security relationship with the US, do you think?
Look, I think the effects of particular presidencies are somewhat overstated. I think the major trends in the US alliance relationships in Asia are pretty well settled in, no matter who is president. And in fact, I would argue that in terms of America's military presence in the region, not much has changed over the last 4 or 5 presidencies. We could look over the entire post-Cold War period, and America's military presence in this region really hasn't changed very much, no matter who was in charge. And even despite the fact of Obama announcing a pivot in 2011. So I think the trends are pretty well entrenched. There'll be no major withdrawals from the region, but it looks unlikely that the United States is going to dramatically reinforce its presence in this region either. Now, that said, the Trump factor does introduce a broader range of possibilities for the alliance. So Australia got away pretty scot-free during the first Trump presidency, even though Trump himself was very much an anti-alliance figure. He never had Australia in its sights, and actually he never had backing inside his own administration to pursue his own instinct, which was to withdraw from Japan and from Korea.
Sure.
So it's an open question whether that might happen in a second Trump administration.
Well, we're out of time. Sam Roggeveen, thanks so much for your comments on Sky today.
Thanks, Kenny. Appreciate the time.